The cabin. Nestled along the tranquil shore of a pristine Vermont lake, the wooden cabin exuded a timeless rustic charm. Jake's father took good care of it, always fixing, building, improving, painting. The cabin's modest footprint blended harmoniously with the surrounding landscape. Its low profile was dwarfed by towering white pines that framed the lake's edge. The steeply pitched roof, covered in dark green metal sheeting, was free of moss or debris, a result of Jake's father's regular maintenance. A sturdy stone chimney rose from the roof's center, and its base was surrounded by a small stack of neatly split firewood, always replenished before winter. Inside, the cabin was simple: 2 bedrooms and a small living room with fireplace, a sofa, and a big wood-carved table. The porch overlooked the glassy lake, where the water reflected the vibrant autumn foliage or the soft pinks of a summer dawn, with no other human presence to disturb the view for miles. As kids, me, Jake, Jane, and a handful of our classmates would pile into Jake's dad's old pickup truck for the bumpy ride to the cabin, our laughter drowning out the creaky suspension. Those summer days were magic. We'd burst out of the truck and race to the dock and jumped into the cool, clear lake before Jake's dad could even unload the cooler. The cabin felt like our secret clubhouse, its warm log walls and crackling fireplace wrapping us in comfort after hours of swimming. We would sprawl on the porch with dripping popsicles, playing cards, or listening Jake's dad's spooky stories about a demon living in the lake. The scent of pine and grilled hot dogs lingered in the air, and the lake's gentle lapping was our soundtrack, with no other souls around to break the spell of our wild, carefree adventures. When we were 15, Jake's father drowned while fishing on the lake. His body was never found, so the weight of cabin's care fell on us. We visited less often, and eventually the group dwindled to just 3 of us: Jake, Jane, and me. Those nights by the lake, with the cabin's warm glow behind us and the crackle of a bonfire, became our refuge. Sitting on the dock, wrapped in blankets, Jane's laughter and the way her eyes caught the starlight stirred something new in me. Those moments, under the vast Vermont sky, sparked feelings that grew until Jane became my girlfriend, the cabin holding not just memories of childhood, but the beginning of something deeper. In late fall of my freshman year in college, I visited the cabin for the last time. I was back in my hometown, my heart heavy with the news that Jane and Jake were now together, a truth that shattered the lingering warmth of our teenage romance. The betrayal stung, but I swallowed my pain. They were happy after all. I reached out to Jake and asked if he wanted to visit the cabin, just the 2 of us, as if revisiting our childhood place could somehow mend what was broken. Jane was out of town, so Jake had no other plans. The drive was quiet. Only the pickup's wipers swished the tune at a steady drizzle that blurred the woods into a misty haze. By the time we arrived, though, the sky cleared, and we decided to start a bonfire on the shore. The day of rain left the autumn air crisp and heavy with the scent of wet pine, as Jake and I sat by a crackling fire. The flames cast flickering shadows on the gravel path, and the lake like a dark mirror reflecting the cloudy sky lay still. We were deep in nostalgia, laughing over childhood memories. Jake was midway through recounting the time Tommy got stuck in the canoe, his voice animated, when his face froze and his smile vanished like a snuffed candle. His eyes locked onto the lake, staring into the inky darkness beyond the fire's glow. "Jake, come on, I'm not falling for it," I said, rolling my eyes, expecting him to crack a grin and admit to another prank. But he didn't move, didn't blink, his gaze fixed on the water, as if something unseen held him in a trance, the silence between us growing heavier than the night itself. I followed Jake's unblinking stare, my eyes straining against the darkness cloaking the lake. At first, it was just a faint smudge in the middle of the still, black water, a pale, white shape breaking the surface. My mind scrambled for logic, dismissing it as a piece of driftwood, maybe an old branch caught in the shallows. But the longer I looked, the more creeping unease settled in. The shape was too deliberate, too human-like, its outline suggesting a tall, ghostly figure standing chest-deep, one elongated arm stretched out toward us like an eerie invitation. A chill snaked up my spine, sharp and cold, but I forced a laugh, my voice shaky as I muttered, "It's just a stupid log, right? Some dumb tree playing tricks." I glanced at Jake, hoping for a smirk to break the tension, but his face was ashen, his eyes still locked on the water. "It's back," Jake said, his voice low and flat, cutting through the crackle of the bonfire. "Let's get inside." There was no trace of the prankster I'd expected, no hint of the Jake who had once convinced us that the cabin was haunted just to steal our marshmallows. His words hummed heavy, and my forced bravado crumbled. The pale shape hadn't moved, but it felt alive, watching us from the lake's heart. Without another word, we abandoned the bonfire and hurried toward the cabin. The crunch of gravel under our feet seemed drowned out by the weight of that silent, outstretched figure lingering in the dark water behind us. I put out the fire and ran after Jake. Inside the cabin, Jake was unnervingly quiet, his usual chatter replaced by a tense silence. He muttered, "Let's call it a day," his voice barely above a whisper, and headed straight for the small bedroom off the main room. The door clicked shut behind him, followed by the distinct sound of the lock sliding into place. A sharp, unfamiliar noise that made my stomach twist. Jake locking his door. That was new, and it set my mind racing with questions. What did he mean by "it's back"? Why was he so shaken? I sank onto the plaid sofa, fumbling with my phone, desperately searching for cell reception. No signal. I flicked off the lights. Peering out, I scanned the lake, its surface now smooth, an oily void under the faint moonlight. The pale, human-like shape we'd seen was gone. No trace of the eerie figure or even a stray log breaking the water's stillness. My heart still pounded, but exhaustion was winning. I shuffled to the loft, climbed into one of the twin beds, and pulled the wool blanket tight. Despite the questions swirling in my head, the quiet of the cabin and the rhythmic pattern of lingering drizzle on the roof lulled me, and I fell into a deep, uneasy sleep. I jolted awake, heart racing, as a deep, rumbling sound shattered the silence, thunder, or so I thought, until it felt more like something heavy slamming against the cabin door. I laid still, straining to hear over the pounding in my chest. Outside, the night was not quiet anymore. Faint, deliberate sounds emerged, like slow footsteps crunching twigs near the cabin. The porch deck creaked under an unseen weight, each groan of the woods sending a fresh wave of dread through me. I held my breath, waiting for another sign, but then, nothing. Just an oppressive silence that pressed against the cabin's walls. I stayed awake, eyes fixed on the skylight, unable to shake the feeling of being watched, until the first gray light of dawn finally crept across the lake. In the morning, I found Jake in the kitchen. Over the faint smell of coffee, I asked if he had heard the footsteps outside last night, hoping he'd laugh it off as my imagination running wild. But his eyes flicked to the lake, and without a trace of his usual grin, he said, "Let's pack and go back to town." His voice was flat, almost urgent, and he turned away to grab his bag, leaving my questions hanging in the air. Jake and I loaded our bags into his dad's old pickup, but the truck sputtered and refused to start, its engine coughing weakly before falling silent. Jake, still pale but resolute, grabbed a toolbox from the shed and spent nearly the entire day sprawled under the chassis, muttering about spark plugs and fuel lines, his hands smeared with grease as he tried to coax the old beast back to life. With the sun dipping low and no progress made, Jake sat under a pine exhausted. A large stain of oil glistening on his light shirt looked like blood on his chest. I looked at my hands and was surprised to see that they got soiled, though I did not remember helping Jake. Both tired, we agreed to stay one more night in the cabin, the lake's eerie stillness and the last rays of dusk seeming to watch us as we hauled our bags back inside, the weight of another night in that isolated place settling heavily on our shoulders. By late evening, a steady rain began to fall again, drumming on the cabin's metal roof as Jake and I, restless and on edge, ventured down to the lake's edge, hoping the truck's failure was the worst of our worries. But as we reached the dock, our breath caught. There in the gray, rain-rippled water, the pale, human-like figure was back, much closer this time, no more than 20 feet from shore. Its faceless head trembled slightly, and both of its unnaturally long arms stretched toward us, rigid and cupped, as if reaching through the drizzle. My stomach lurched, Jake's face drained of color. Without a word, we turned and sprinted back to the cabin, our boots slipping on wet gravel, and slammed the door behind us, fumbling to lock it as the image of that shaking, faceless form burned into our minds. The rain turned really heavy, hammering the cabin's roof like 1,000 fists, drowning out all but the pounding in our chests as Jake and I sat still on the couch, silent, as if waiting for the inevitable. The air felt thick, charged with dread, when suddenly the door handle rattled, twisting slowly. We froze, terror rooting us to the spot, our eyes locked on the door as something, or someone, began pounding against it, each thud shaking the frame. Then, as abruptly as it started, the pounding stopped, leaving only the relentless rain. Heartbeats deafening, we crept to the window, hands trembling as we pulled back the curtain. A silent scream lodged in our throats. Pressed against the glass was a pale, featureless face. No mouth, no nose, just enormous, lidless, colorless eyes staring inside, unblinking, piercing through us into the dim warmth of the cabin. Jake didn't utter a word. His face was a mask of grim resolve as he bolted to his room, the floorboards creaking under his urgency. He returned clutching a rifle, its barrel gleaming faintly in the cabin's dim light, and without hesitation, he flung open the front door, stepping into the relentless downpour. The rain swallowed him instantly, his figure vanishing into the dark, stormy night beyond the threshold. That was the last time I saw my best friend, his silhouette etched against the torrent, rifle in hand, consumed by the same creepy darkness that had haunted us since we arrived. After Jake vanished into the storm, no sound followed, just the persistent drumming of rain. I stood frozen in the middle of the cabin, clutching my baseball bat. Hours later, the rain abruptly ceased, leaving an unsettling quiet that pressed against the log walls. As the first light of dawn broke, casting a pale glow over the lake, I grabbed Jake's bike from the shed, my hands shaking, and pedaled furiously toward town, never looking back, the cabin's haunting stillness chasing me down the winding road. I thought I escaped the cabin, but I was wrong. After so many years, its image continues tormenting me. Its decaying half-collapsed roof, walls covered in mold, sagging deck. I wake up in cold sweat after seeing my pale face reflected in the cracked window of the cabin engulfed in flames. Years passed with no answers, no footprints, no rifle, no sign of Jake, and eventually the authorities declared him dead. Who knows where his body vanished? Only me and the cabin.
The cave. All my life, my path has wound inexorably toward it. Its ghostly echoes haunted me as I trudged through the dim, serpentine corridors of Auburn Prison, each footfall a hollow reverberation of the cave's unseen chambers. I inhaled its damp, moss-laden breath while lying bloodied and broken on the war-torn fields near Sharpsburg, the scent of earth and stone mingling with my own despair. As a child, I felt its suffocating, humid darkness envelop me, waking drenched in sweat, my voice a trembling cry for my mother. The final thrust toward my destiny ignited upon our return to the rugged shores of New England, my companion, Bill, and I emerging empty-handed from a grueling 2-year expedition to the frozen wilds of the Klondike. Fortune had eluded us in those icy expanses, leaving our pockets as barren as the tundra we traversed, and desperation clawed at our resolve like the bitter winds that had whipped our faces. In a reckless bid for survival, we ambushed a postal wagon under the cover of twilight, seizing what meager spoils we could amid the chaos of shouts and gunfire. Now, with the relentless sheriff and his posse closing in, we fled deeper into the woods. Deep within the tangled embrace of the forest, Billy and I stumbled upon a faint glow flickering through the trees. There by a modest fire sat an old Indian, his weathered face etched with lines that spoke of countless winters. His eyes, sharp as flint, studied us as we approached, wary but weary. We offered him what little food we had, stale bread and a strip of dried meat, and settled beside him, the warmth of the flames a fleeting reprieve from the chill of our flight. Over the crackle of burning wood, we spoke in hushed tones of our predicament, seeking his wisdom on evading the sheriff's relentless pursuit. The old man, his voice low and steady like the murmur of a distant stream, told us of a secluded lake deeper in the wilderness, a haven teeming with game and fish, where we might find shelter and sustenance to weather the coming winter. Eagerly, we pressed him to guide us there, but his gaze grew distant, clouded with fear. He shook his head and, after a long silence, began to recount the tale of his father, Hawkeye. Long ago, Hawkeye and his tribe, driven from their lands by the tide of white settlers, had fled to that very lake. A group of armed settlers chased the tribe down. To protect their women and children, they scattered them into the surrounding wilds, while the men, clutching the tribe's sacred gold, sought refuge in a small, hidden cave. The old man's voice trembled as he spoke of that cave, for he never saw his father again, nor learned the fate of the gold, swallowed by the darkness that had claimed Hawkeye and his kin. As the fire's embers dwindled, Billy and I exchanged fevered glances, the old man's tale of hidden gold kindling a reckless spark in our hearts. The Klondike had left us broken and empty, but here was a chance to reclaim our fortunes. We resolved to find that cave, to unearth the tribe's lost treasure, and secure our freedom from the law's tightening noose. The old man, sensing our intent, rose with surprising vigor, his frail hands grasping at our sleeves as he pleaded with us to abandon the quest. His warnings of doom, of a cave that devoured men whole, only stoked Billy's impatience. In a moment of heated frustration, Billy shoved him back, harder than intended, and the old man crumpled to the ground, his head striking a jagged rock with a sickening crack. Silence fell, broken only by the fire's faint hiss. Billy, pale but resolute, rifled through the old man's tattered bag, spilling its contents across the forest floor, a crust of bread, a worn Bible, a rusted medallion etched with strange, faded symbols, a finely crafted hunting knife with a bone handle, and a small axe. Billy pocketed the knife, I took the axe, and we left the old man's lifeless form behind, our boots pounding the earth as we fled deeper into the night, the weight of our sin trailing us like a shadow, urging us ever closer to the cave's elusive embrace. On the second day, weary and haunted, we reached the lake, its still surface reflecting the somber grey of the autumn sky. With the tools from the old man's bag, a small axe and the hunting knife, we set to work, felling slender pines and fashioning a crude cabin along the lake's edge. The labor steadied our nerves, the rhythm of chopping wood a temporary balm against the guilt that gnawed at us. The lake was as promised, abundant with fish and surrounded by tracks of deer and smaller game, ensuring our survival through the coming cold. Yet the cave loomed in our minds, its pull stronger than the sheriff's pursuit. For weeks we scoured the surrounding wilderness, combing through dense thickets and rocky outcrops, our eyes straining for any sign of the fabled refuge. At last, as the first snow dusted the ground, we found it. A narrow gash in a hillside, its entrance shrouded by a curtain of tangled leaves and brittle twigs, as if the forest itself sought to conceal its secrets. Standing before it, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth, I felt the cave's familiar presence, the same oppressive darkness that had haunted my dreams, now beckoning us to cross its threshold. The next morning, driven by a mix of greed and grim determination, Billy and I prepared for our descent into the cave. We packed what provisions we could muster, dried fish and a few strips of venison from our hunts, along with makeshift torches crafted from pine branches and strips of cloth soaked in animal fat. With a hunting knife strapped to Billy's belt and the old man's axe, we brushed aside the leafy veil and stepped into the cave's chilly embrace. Its walls, slick with moisture, seemed to pulse with a life of their own, swallowing the light of our torches within moments. 5 minutes in, or so it seemed, the labyrinthine passages twisted our senses, each turn blending into the next until we were utterly lost in the suffocating dark. Time unraveled in that endless maze. What felt like mere minutes stretched into an eternity of echoing drips and our own ragged breaths. For what seemed like 3 days, we stumbled through the cave's depths, our torches burning low, our bodies aching with exhaustion, and our minds fraying under the weight of its oppressive silence. At last, half-starved and delirious, we glimpsed a faint glimmer ahead. Scrambling toward it, we emerged into the crisp night air, collapsing beneath a canopy of stars that glittered like scattered diamonds. Relief flooded through us, our laughter weak but fervent as we lay on the cold ground, grateful to have escaped the cave's clutches, though its shadow lingered in our hearts, whispering of secrets yet unfound. After a brief rest, our bodies still trembling from the ordeal, Billy and I resolved to keep moving, the weight of the cave's darkness urging us onward. We descended toward the lake, its familiar shimmer catching the starlight, yet an eerie unease settled over us. The shoreline mirrored the one we knew, but our cabin, our rough-hewn sanctuary, was nowhere to be found. The trees, the rocks, even the curve of the water's edge felt right, yet wrong, as if the land had shifted in our absence. Perplexed and driven by a gnawing instinct, we decided to cross the ridge beyond the lake, hoping to find answers on the other side. We trekked through the night, our boots sinking into the frost-crusted earth. The stars above offered no comfort, their cold light guiding us through a forest that grew increasingly unfamiliar. We walked for hours, expecting the dawn to break, but the sky remained an unbroken shroud of night. No sun rose, no light pierced the horizon, and a creeping dread settled in our bones as we realized the world beyond the cave was no longer the one we had known, its rules bent by the same dark force that had drawn us to its depths. Exhausted, we paused to rest, our breaths visible in the frigid air. Gazing upward, we searched the sky for solace, but the stars above were alien, their patterns unrecognizable. Billy, who had once navigated the Klondike's vast wilderness using just his knowledge of constellations, furrowed his brow in confusion, and I too found no trace of Orion or the Big Dipper, stars that had guided us through countless nights. A cold fear gripped our hearts, the realization dawning that the cave had not merely released us, but had altered the very fabric of the world we knew. Yet with no other path forward, we pressed on, trudging through the endless night for another 8 hours, our legs heavy and our spirits fraying. As the first hints of fatigue threatened to break us, the forest parted, and we found ourselves once more at the edge of a lake, its glassy surface identical to the one we had left, yet still no sign of our cabin or any mark of our presence. The same water, the same encircling pines, the same oppressive stillness. It was our lake, yet not. I wondered if we had ever truly escaped its labyrinth, or if we were doomed to wander its shadowed echoes forever. For what felt like 3 days, Billy and I wandered in a maddening cycle, each step leading us back to the same cursed lake, its waters mocking our efforts to break free. The absence of the sun gnawed at our sanity, the eternal night blurring the edges of time until hours and days became indistinguishable. Desperate to escape the loop, we resolved to retrace our path, following the faint markers of our earlier journey, the broken branches, the scuffed earth, hoping to unravel the path that had led us to the lake. The forest seemed to close in around us, its silence heavier than before, as if the trees themselves were complicit in the cave's design. After hours of relentless trekking, our legs burning and our stomachs hollow, a faint flicker pierced the gloom ahead, a campfire's glow dancing among the trees. Our hearts leaped with a mix of hope and dread, for the light recalled the night we met the old Indian, his tales and his fate now woven into the fabric of our doom. As we drew closer, I felt the cave's presence tighten its grip, as if the fire ahead was not a beacon of salvation, but a lure drawing us deeper into its inescapable maw. A chill cascaded down my spine like icy fingers as the scene unfolded before us. The old Indian, seated by the fire in the exact posture of our first encounter, his silhouette etched against the flames as if time itself had looped back upon us. I froze, rooted to the spot, my limbs heavy with terror, unable to summon even a whisper. Billy, however, pressed forward, his steps deliberate and unyielding, drawn inexorably toward the apparition. I longed to cry out, to warn him of the unnatural repetition, but my voice caught in my throat, silenced by the weight of the moment. He approached the old man slowly, the crackle of the fire the only sound piercing the night. Billy came to a halt beside him, and the old Indian turned his face toward Billy, a faint, knowing smile curling his weathered lips. as if welcoming an old acquaintance to his fate. Without a word, Billy stepped forward, his form merging with the blaze. The flames enveloped him completely, consuming him in a silent inferno that left no ash, no scream, only the echo of his absence in the flickering light. Terror propelled me backward, and I fled through the woods, branches whipping at my face like vengeful spirits, until I burst onto the shore of that damned lake once more. Collapsing onto the pebbled edge, I wept, great sobs racking my body as the weight of isolation crushed me. For what seemed an eternity, I stared into the lake's inky depths, its surface a mirror to the void that had claimed Billy and perhaps countless others before us. Then, in the midst of despair, clarity pierced the fog of my mind like a shaft of forgotten light. I understood the only means to break free from this infernal realm. With trembling hands, I sealed my diary into an empty whiskey bottle, tucking it beneath a massive boulder near where our phantom cabin should have stood. May this account serve as a dire warning to any soul ensnared in this accursed place. If you want to escape, the sole path lies through entering again the horrible abyss of the cave.
The lake, my father would often declare, with a gleam in his eye and a sweep of his weathered hand. Jake, our lake is the most beautiful place in America. Nestled like a sapphire jewel amid the gentle embrace of low, tree-cloaked mountains where ancient pines and vibrant maples whispered secrets to the wind, the lake was a sanctuary of unparalleled serenity. Fed by a network of crystal-clear creeks that tumbled down from snow-covered hills in spring and meandered lazily through mossy glades in summer, its waters were renowned as the clearest in the United States, pure enough to reveal every pebble on the bottom, every darting fish in its depths, and every reflection of the sky above with mirror-like fidelity. The air around it carried the crisp scent of pine resin and wildflowers, and on still mornings, the surface lay so tranquil that it blurred the line between earth and heaven, inviting one to lose themselves in its timeless allure. It was there, on the lake's pristine shores, that my father had purchased an old, dilapidated shack, its timbers groaning under the weight of forgotten years, and transformed it into a great, cozy cabin with his own calloused hands. He poured his soul into every nail and beam, crafting a haven of warm wood and flickering firelight, complete with a wraparound porch that offered unbroken views of the water's expanse. The cabin and the lake swiftly became a cherished refuge for me and my friends, a place of endless adventures, skipping stones that danced across the surface, fishing at dawn with lines trailing into the depths, and sharing ghost stories under the starlit canopy. But it held a deeper significance for my father, who retreated to its solitude more frequently as the storms of his marriage raged on. He and my mother fought with increasing bitterness, their voices echoing like thunder through our city home, driving him to seek solace in the lake's quiet embrace, where the lapping waves could drown out the echoes of his troubled past. My father would spend countless hours on the lake, casting his fishing line into its crystalline depths or gliding through the water with powerful strokes as if he could outswim the weight of his sorrows. One fateful day, while wading in the shallows where the creek fed into the lake's edge, he spotted a glint beneath the surface, a weathered whiskey bottle, half buried in the silty bed, its glass clouded by time. He plucked it from the water and discovered inside a bundle of brittle, handwritten notes, their ink faded but legible. He claimed they were the musings of local drifters from the last century, wanderers who had roamed these mountains and rested by this very lake. When my mother finally left, her departure a quiet severance that left our home hollow, my father's refuge became his prison. The lake, once his sanctuary, now bore witness to his descent into the bottle, each sip of whiskey a futile attempt to dull the ache of her absence. I'd find him sprawled in the cabin's worn armchair, a glass in one hand and a tattered diary in the other, its pages yellowed and brittle. In the dim glow of the fire, his words slurred but heavy with feeling, he read aloud from the diary, his laughter rough and bittersweet. "This fella," he'd say, chuckling through a haze of liquor, "he's just like me, Jake. Same damn fool, chasing ghosts." He'd pause, eyes distant, and recount how the diary's author, a man lost to time, had served in Battalion 245 under the command of Jeff McGregor, the very same battalion and commander he'd fought alongside in the jungles of Vietnam, a coincidence that bound him to the stranger's words like a thread across decades, as if the lake itself had summoned their shared burdens to its shores. My father began poring over the diary with an obsessive fervor, its pages becoming his scripture in the dim light of the cabin, each entry a mirror to his unraveling soul. The note spoke of a hidden cave near the lake, a shadowy refuge that had ensnared the drifter in its depths, and soon my father set out to find it, trekking through the dense woods with a map sketched from the faded descriptions. When he finally located the cave, a narrow fissure cloaked in vines and moss, exhaling a chill, damp breath, he was transformed, drawn back to it with increasing frequency. His visits grew longer, stretching from hours into days, and upon his return, he staggered to the cabin drunk, caked in grime, and sometimes streaked with blood, his eyes wild with unspoken horrors. The lake, once his balm, now seemed complicit in his descent, its clear waters reflecting a man lost to the shadows that lurked beyond its serene facade. My dad would often tell me that every time he read the notes, he uncovered more uncanny parallels between the drifter's life and his own, as if the diary was some twisted mirror. The last straw came the day I read over his shoulder and learned that the drifter's wife was named Jill, and she had died in a gruesome saw accident. Dad chuckled at the absurdity, shaking his head, saying there was no way that part could match his life. After all, my mom was a school teacher. But the lake seemed to have its own cruel sense of irony. 2 months later, as she walked home from the market, a runaway saw blade from a timber factory ripped free, hurtling across the street and striking her down in an instant. I remember the phone call, the hollow echo of the hospital hallway, and the strange, suffocating thought that the diary had been waiting to prove my father wrong. When I told him, his face went white, and without a word, he staggered out toward the lake. After the accident, Dad never returned to the city. The cabin became his whole world, a dim-lit cocoon where the fire crackled and the smell of pine smoke clung to every surface. I visited when I could, worried by the way his voice had gone thin and far away over the phone. One evening, I found him slumped in his armchair, pale as bone, a half-empty bottle resting at his feet. His hands trembled as he held the diary. "Jake," he whispered, eyes glassy, "I've had these notes for years, but I realized last night, they're signed." He swallowed hard, "and they're signed by my name." I tried to brush it off, thinking it was just the whiskey talking, but he shoved the bundle toward me, and I took it, expecting nothing. My stomach tightened when I turned to the last page. The signature was there, written in a looping, unfamiliar hand, but the name was undeniably my father's. It was wrong, deeply wrong. I forced a laugh, muttering something about coincidence, but the air in the room felt heavier. I told myself I'd drive back in the morning, yet some gnawing instinct made me decide to stay one more night. That night, the wind rose and rattled the cabin's walls, and somewhere out past the porch, I swore I heard footsteps in the pine needles. I woke to the sound of my father screaming, a raw, animal sound that cut through the dark. I bolted from the couch and into his room. He was sitting upright on the bed, eyes fixed on something I couldn't see, the yellowed page trembling in his hand. "Dad," I said, breathless. No answer, not even a blink. I stepped closer, gently prying the paper from his fingers. The first thing I noticed was the dark smear, fresh blood, still tacky, across the brittle surface. Then my eyes caught the words, written in the same faded ink as the rest of the diary. "I drowned in the lake." 1,000 thoughts flashed through my mind like lightning. Why hadn't I seen this before? Had it been hidden? And how could the author possibly have written about his own death? I forced a smile, hoping to chase the fear from the room. "You surely can't drown in the shallow lake, Dad. You're the college swimming champ, remember?" But he didn't smile. His gaze shifted slowly toward me, and in the flickering lamplight, I saw that his eyes were wet, not just with tears, but with the reflection of something moving in the darkness behind me, as if the lake itself had crept into the room. Dad didn't speak. His hands moved with a strange, jerky purpose as he gathered the yellowed pages and began stuffing them back into the cloudy glass bottle, one after another, the paper crinkling like dry leaves. "What are you doing, Dad?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He finally looked at me, eyes bloodshot and determined. "I have to return this bottle to the cave where it belongs." Before I could argue, he was on his feet, moving fast for a man his age. I followed him out into the cold night air, the wind off the lake biting my face. The moon cast a silver road across the water, leading straight toward the black outline of the far shore. "Dad, stop!" I shouted, but he didn't even glance back. He sprinted down the creaking dock, bottle clutched in one hand, and leaped into the motorboat. The engine coughed, then roared to life, shattering the stillness. I stood there, barefoot on the dock, watching him speed off toward the shadows, the boat's wake rippling across the lake's mirror surface. The bottle glinted once in the moonlight before it vanished into the entrance to the cave. I expected him to reappear within minutes, maybe muttering about the cold, maybe laughing to himself, but the cave swallowed him whole. The lake had turned into a sheet of black glass, the moon hidden behind a thick quilt of clouds. I stood on the dock, shivering, my flashlight beam cutting a narrow cone of light toward the cave's vine-draped entrance on the far shore. The silence pressed in. Every ripple sounded like a whisper. Every shadow seemed to lean closer. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I grabbed my canoe from its rack, the damp wood cold under my hands, and reached for the oar. But just as my fingers closed around the oar, movement caught my eye. From the mouth of the cave, a dark shape emerged, my father, walking slowly out. He didn't wave. He didn't shield his face from the glare of my flashlight. He just moved forward with a slow, deliberate step, straight into the black waters. "Dad!" I shouted, my voice breaking. But he didn't react. It was as though my words couldn't reach him, as though the night had swallowed sound itself. He kept walking deeper and deeper, until the water lapped at his waist. I shoved the canoe into the lake, the hull slapping against the water, and leaped in. The paddle bit into the surface with sharp, hurried strokes, my breath clouding in the cold air. I kept calling his name, my voice echoing across the still water, the beam of my flashlight catching glimpses of his dark silhouette, vanishing and reappearing like a phantom. Then something. A sound. Not his voice, but a deep, resonant growl that vibrated through the air, through the water, through my bones. It was nothing human. I froze mid-stroke. My flashlight found him again, standing chest-deep in the middle of the lake, facing away. Then, with agonizing slowness, he turned to me. His eyes locked on mine, wide and unblinking, and in them was something I'd never seen before. Pure, consuming terror. He stretched his arms toward me, too long, impossibly long, and that guttural growl spilled from his mouth. My flashlight slipped from my hands and hissed into the water, plunging me into darkness. I paddled toward him blindly, each stroke frantic, heart pounding in my ears. But when I reached the spot where he'd stood, there was nothing. Just the cold, black water of the lake and the quiet ripple of something slipping beneath its surface. That was the last time I saw my father. He was consumed by the dark waters of the lake. The lake.
The amulet. It was made from a shiny white metal, smooth as glass yet warm to the touch, etched with tiny, intricate hieroglyphs that curled and spiraled like secrets. They reminded me of the Aztec carvings I'd once seen in a magazine, strange figures, suns, and jagged lines that seemed to hum with hidden meaning. In the center sat a stone the color of deep ocean water, so blue it seemed to draw your gaze inside, as if there were something moving beneath its surface. My father used to tell me that his grandfather had found it in the unlikeliest place, wedged deep inside a beaver's nest along the banks of the Blackwater River. It laughed when I asked how such a thing could end up there. Maybe the beaver was a collector, he'd say, winking. Or maybe it was keeping it safe. But he'd never elaborate, and there was a tone in his voice that told me the truth was something stranger. It had been passed down like an heirloom, though no one in the family ever wore it. Instead, it sat in a small oak box on the top shelf of my father's study, wrapped in a square of faded red cloth. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sneak in and unwrap it just to hold it, feeling the weight of it in my palm. When I was about 10, he leaned close to me one evening by the fire, his voice low and steady, the flames throwing deep shadows across his face. He said his father had told him that if you pressed the amulet to your left eye and stared straight into the blue stone, Ahuizotl himself, the ancient water god, would enter your body. For just a moment, he said, you would be with the god, feel his power in your blood, see through his eyes. I never knew if he was serious or if it was just another of his half-mythical tales meant to scare or impress me. But the way he spoke without a trace of a smile left me uneasy. The amulet was not his only treasure. My father was also the guardian of our tribe's golden sacred jewelry, a collection of necklaces, rings, and crowns handed down from generation to generation. The pieces were old, older than any of us could trace, each one humming with a history that felt heavier than gold. He could have sold them to the white colonists. Yet even during the famine, when my younger brother's ribs showed like the branches of a dead tree and the fever finally took him, my father refused. Gold belongs to the earth, and the earth belongs to us, he said, though his own eyes were hollow with hunger. His obsession drove him to lead our small tribe farther and farther away from the settlements, always deeper into the wild, as if distance alone could protect what he carried. After yet another train was robbed, this time leaving 2 settlers dead, the local sheriff swore he'd had enough. He rallied a posse of ranchers, trackers, and bounty men, their rifles gleaming in the sun, their horses foaming with the promise of a hunt. Word spread fast. They were closing in on Hawkeye's band. When the news reached us, Hawkeye, my father, gathered the tribe in a clearing. His voice was steady, but there was a heaviness in it I had never heard before. He told the women, children, and elders to scatter into the woods and mountains, to melt into the land like shadows. The strongest men would stay behind with him, to hold the line on the shore of the great lake. That night, as the drums fell silent, he came to me. "Don't be afraid," he said. "If there is no other choice, I will do what our ancestors never dared." He touched the amulet's blue stone with his thumb, the firelight glinting in its depths. "I will summon Ahuizotl." I didn't know if I believed in the god or not, but the way he said it made the air between us feel heavier. He kissed my forehead, pressed his carved pipe into my hands, and left me with the smell of tobacco and cedar lingering in my hair. Then he lifted the wrapped bundle of golden jewelry onto his back, the amulet hanging against his chest, and walked into the narrow cave that bit into the lake's edge. That was the last time I saw my father. I turned and ran through the pines, over the ridges, across creeks that bit at my ankles, until my legs burned and my breath came ragged. I didn't stop until I stumbled into the fires of another tribe's camp, their warriors staring at me like I had dragged the storm itself behind me. After a year, the ache in my chest drove me back to that cursed shore. I told myself it was to find his remains, to give him the burial he deserved. But in truth, I needed proof. Proof that what happened had been real. The lake was as still as the day I had fled, the cave yawning like a mouth in the cliffside. I searched the shore, the rocks, the tree line. Not a footprint, not a scrap of cloth, not a bone. It was as if no man had ever entered that cave, as if my father had been swallowed clean from the world. Years passed. I grew older, and the pull of the city finally outweighed the call of the forest. I packed what little I owned, ready to leave the land of my ancestors behind. But before I left, I made one last pilgrimage to the lake. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of moss. I walked the familiar path to the cave, and there it was, lying in the grass right at the mouth of the darkness, as if it had been placed there for me, the amulet. The white metal caught the weak daylight, and the blue stone seemed deeper than I remembered, like it had been steeped in the shadows of the cave. I picked it up, felt its familiar weight in my palm, and without thinking, slipped it into my bag. It's been with me ever since, through the noise of the city, the years of work and age, the slow erosion of memory. But sometimes when I touched it, I swear I could smell the lake again. And on certain nights I dreamed of my father's voice, calling from somewhere deep and cold, just beyond the reach of light. At the end of my life, when my bones ached with every step and each breath felt like it might be my last, I knew it was time to return to that cursed place. Not for answers. I had long since abandoned the hope of those, but to face whatever still lingered there. The journey was slow. The land had changed, roads where there had been none, fallen trees where once the forest had been endless. Still, the air grew colder and wetter the closer I drew to the lake, as if it knew I was coming. Halfway there, my strength faltered. My legs trembled, and a heavy weariness wrapped itself around my chest. I realized I might not live to see the cave again. I stopped at a clearing by the river and built a small fire, its light flickering weakly in the encroaching dark. From my bag I drew my father's pipe, the same one he had pressed into my hands the night he disappeared. The wood was worn smooth from decades of my touch. I packed it with mescaline, struck a match, and drew the smoke deep into my lungs. The flames before me began to sway and stretch, their shapes twisting into visions. Faces I knew, faces I didn't, gold gleaming in the shadows, a ripple across black water. Somewhere in the crackle of the fire, I thought I heard my father's voice. It wasn't calling my name. Two shadows began to form in the edges of the firelight, stretching taller, darker, until they took shape. They were not men. Their skin was the color of cooled ash, their eyes like burning coals. One carried a long, thin wand of gold, the other a twisted blade that shimmered without light. "Where are you going, old one?" the first asked, its voice like wind through a grave. I told them everything. About the cave, about the amulet, about Hawkeye's last stand. Their faces contorted with rage. Without a word, the one with the wand thrust it into my chest, and pain unlike anything I'd known tore through me. My legs gave out. I fell, my head striking a rock. I knew this was my end, but my hand was already on the amulet. With my last breath, I pressed it to my left eye. The world erupted. I saw the demons recoil, their forms unraveling into smoke, sucked into the heart of the fire until there was nothing left but sparks. I saw Hawkeye, my father, emerge from the cave, stumbling to the water's edge, his face gaunt and terrified, lit by 1,000 stars mirrored in the black lake. He fell to his knees and drank, gulping like a man who had wandered the deserts of the underworld for centuries. The vision shifted. On the far shore, a cabin glowed with warm light. I began swimming toward it, my arms cutting through the water with desperate strength. Beside me, a black dog swam, his eyes fixed on the light ahead. We reached the bank together. The dog bounded onto the shore and ran to the cabin door, vanishing inside. I followed, but paused at a bright window and peered in. It was there. Ahuizotl. His face, perfect and terrible, divine and monstrous, was turned toward me. In one hand, a knife slick with blood. In the other, a still-beating heart, its rhythm echoing in my own chest. On the floor beneath him lay the body of a man whose face I could not see. I screamed. Ahuizotl looked at me with calm, almost pity. His lips curled into the faintest smile. Around his neck hung the amulet, the same white metal, the same impossible blue stone, but now pulsing with a light that painted the room in shades of ocean and night. He nodded once. I opened the door and stepped inside. The flames closed around me, warm and blinding, yet cool at their core. Outside, the vermont night stretched into eternity, its darkness pierced by a single point of blue fire, light spilling from the heart of the amulet.